know exactly the same problem is coming up. And you see China, which has huge reserves of money, a lot of it ours, busy buying up uh, land in Canada where they can get oil and so forth. They know what's coming, and they know that if you think in three dimensions, they need secure energy supplies. So let's think about secure energy supplies, which also do something about the climate problem as well.
In that line, let's go back to the car for a moment. I saw something on the YouTube, I think it was there, where you were talking to someone about the fact that while California was trying to go ahead with emission controls, that now that the Bush administration is gone and the Obama administration is in, and they are behind a increase in fuel consumption rates, that California should not any longer push to have a separate standard because it only makes it that more difficult to have cars made just for the California standard, and then the rest of the country catches up and those cars are made slightly differently, but we should all compromise and have one system. Have I quoted you right?
Yes, you have. 54 miles per gallon. The feds have gotten the car makers to agree that they can do that. That's quite aggressive. It's supposed to be by 2025. What does California do if they do 54 miles per gallon and say you have to do it by 2020? They just are going to make the problem so much more difficult to solve. Some of the things California does don't make any sense to me, and the mileage one is not one of those. You can argue about what is good or what is bad, but some of the things I think are not sensible at all. One of the things we have in California is something called the Low Carbon Fuel Standard. It just says that the emissions from fuel, when you burn it, have to be down by 10% by 2020. And so I asked myself, what good is that? The emissions from my car, if I put in this new standard, are down by 100%, and I haven't changed the fuel at all. If I just switched to a diesel engine, my emissions would go down by 20 to 30% without changing the fuel at all. So why are you demanding that people do something that's very expensive and very complicated to do when you already have on the books things that are going to do a lot more and don't add more to the cost? That's what I call really sort of stupid regulations. And I have friends who I otherwise think are very sensible people who think this low carbon fuel standard is really neat. And I don't talk to them about it anymore. It doesn't do me any good.
Another thing that you said that got my attention was, why are we spending so much time getting every country to agree to a treaty that will set standards globally? Why do we do that when we know that there's not more than 15 countries that are really contributing to this problem? And why don't we get those 15 or 12 or how many you want to label and not worry about some small little state that might in fact hold the whole process up, but in fact is hardly contributing at all at current medium times to this problem. So you wanted to get on track quickly with those who are the big polluters.
Yes, I think the Kyoto Protocol was a mistake. Excuse me. It's a wrong direction. There are 192 nations that are signatories to the United Nations Framework Convention on Climate Change. And they're all at Kyoto or Copenhagen or whatever it is. There are 15 countries that are responsible for about 82% of all the greenhouse gas emissions. It's a lot easier to deal with 15 countries than with 192, when most of the 192 are only looking for how much money the rich countries will give them to do things which will have essentially no impact. I think we shouldn't worry about the poorest countries. If I take all the poorest countries together, They're only right 1% of the emissions. Let them grow. Let them do things that make people more better off. And when they reach a certain threshold, bring them in to some deal. I chose 15 for a very particular reason. I needed to go to 15 to get in the countries that are just beginning to start up this rapid growth phase. China and India, for example, are already in the rapid growth phase. Indonesia, which has a huge population, is just starting up. Brazil is just starting up. And by going to 15, I managed to include 5 of those 15 are countries at the beginning of the rapid growth phase. We did something like this with the ozone hole. I don't know how many of you heard of the Montreal Protocol. When we had the problem with the ozone hole over the Antarctic, this was a serious problem, and the Montreal Protocol brought together, starting with, I think, 5 or 7 nations, which were the biggest emitters, and it got those 5 or so to agree to begin to do something to cut down the emissions. As time has gone on, they have cut down the emissions, and more countries have signed on to the protocol. If they had started trying to get agreement from 192 countries, they wouldn't have gotten any place. By starting with the ones which were the main problem, they got someplace, and then more and more people came in to join them. Let's do that with greenhouse gas emissions. Let's put this 192 country Kyoto thing aside, and let's start again with the biggest emitters and see what we can do with them.
Now, I believe the business over the Arctic and the Antarctic was basically caused by 2 to 3 phenomena that were easy enough economically to solve. So they weren't as great as solving the emissions that come, say, from automobiles. And that they were feasible, not economically devastating, and reasonably argued by reasonable people, and it got done. The Montreal Protocol was solved, and apparently the problem has been, I believe there was a man at UC Irvine who just died, who was a Nobel Prize winner, who also worked on this.
Sherry Rowland, an old friend of mine.
And so what you have there is a success story within a tightly knit argument. You don't have this broadly based, and it worked.
Yes. But if I look at the countries where they're in the rapid phase of growth, and I look in my 3-dimensional view, there is a very good reason for them to do things. I don't know how many of you have been to China, but if you've been to China in the wintertime, when the coal-fired power plants are spewing out all this stuff and the dust is blowing, that place is really environmentally awful, and they know it. They are eager for affordable technologies that will help the environment broadly. They're more interested in the health business, help their economy by lowering costs, and by the way, do something about climate change. So I think it's a possible thing. I think the Kyoto approach is not going to get any place. I think the notion that there are Class A countries which have to do something with specific goals and Class B countries which don't have to do anything except absorb money from Class A countries is not a recipe for success. And I don't know if a Montreal Protocol type thing would work or not, but it's certainly worth a try.
Well, I brought with me and told you about it, I saw your eyebrows go up, the last issue of The Economist, which I read religiously. And the cover was Nuclear Power, A Dream Ends. So it was a very negative take, but in reading your book, you have a very scientific take. Number one, you've had scientific contacts with the French nuclear energy and the French government. You've sat on boards and you've seen what they do, and you seem to be impressed with their 50-year planning out, et cetera, and all the issues that could come up, and their ability to open the plan every time they need to take a sidetrack if there's something new that's coming in and bring it into the plan, et cetera, et cetera. So is nuclear power one of the mixes that will have to remain within the mix?
It is within the mix, and if you read that article carefully, the substance of the article had nothing to do with its headline. Before Fukushima, there were 163 nuclear power plants in the planning phase. Today, there are 168 new nuclear power plants in the planning phase. Where have things changed? They've changed in the United States. We had 18 in the planning phase. We now have 5, which are actively seeking permits to build, and the other 13 are standing by to see how the 5 come out. And we have Europe, where the Germans are phasing out nuclear power for the 3rd time. The first time they phased it out was after Chernobyl. The second phase out was to phase out the first phase out, and the 3rd phase out is today's phase out to phase out nuclear again, and I'm pretty sure there'll be a 4th one. So a question is, what is going to happen in Europe and what is going to happen in the United States? And you can pretty well see what's happening in the rest of the world. The rest of the world is going right on with nuclear, and they're going on because of economic reasons, because of national security reasons, and because of environmental reasons. I tell people, if I want to run a very big power plant, 1,000 megawatt power plant for a year, I have to deliver 1 truck containing 20 tons of fuel. If I want to run a coal-fired power plant for the same year, I have to deliver 10,000 coal cars to that plant. Expensive, complicated, what have you. Getting nuclear fuel reduces your reliance on all these other things. So when I look at the rest of the world, the arguments are totally different from what they are here. I have to say that there is a problem of perception versus reality in how safe is nuclear and so forth. So when I do this, when I'm giving talks to the students at Stanford, I don't start with nuclear, I start with transportation. What's the scariest thing in transportation? A plane crash. The newspapers are all over it. You see it on the telly. The regulators jump into it. But airplanes per mile traveled are the safest form of transportation. The most hazardous, it won't surprise you, is the motorcycle. But maybe the second will surprise you, it's walking. Per mile traveled, the second riskiest form of transportation is walking. It's more dangerous than driving your car. You read about people getting hit in crosswalks and all of that sort of stuff. Now go look at nuclear. There have been all sorts of analyses done about the hazards to health from nuclear power, including all 3 of the accidents. And what do you come up with? The most hazardous is coal.